She said it loud enough for the waiter to hear. "At least you don't need a Halloween mask. You're scary enough as it is." The forks froze, and I felt every eye in that fancy downtown restaurant turn toward my face. I have learned to keep my hands still when people stare at the burn scars, but my fingers twitched anyway. My name is Ephraim Cole. I am 67 years old, retired from Station 19 after 36 years, widower of Alma, father of one boy who grew into a man I try to raise right. Tonight was his engagement dinner. The table was dressed in white linen. The windows showed the Cleveland skyline catching the last orange of evening. Across from me sat my son, Thayer, and next to him the woman who had just laughed at me, Callista Morrow. She lifted her champagne flute, unbothered. I swallowed air like it hurt. The waiter pretended to check a candle. Thayer cleared his throat and said, "Cal, come on." She shrugged, a little smile like a hook. "I get nervous and joke," she said, but her eyes ran over my cheek like a match across a rough wall. I folded my napkin once, then again, when I felt the old heat crawl up my neck. I did what I always do. I counted. 5 breaths in, 5 out. I told myself I had known worse pain. Steel mill burn when I was 19. Ladder collapse when I was 43. The day Alma did not wake up. That was a fire nobody put out. I kept my voice low. "Congratulations to you both," I said, and slid a small wrapped box across the Thayer. "A watch. My father's. You wear it when you want to remember where you come from." Callista tilted her head. "Vintage. Cute." Her phone lit up. She checked it mid-smile. "Sorry, my parents are running late," she said. "They got stuck by the stadium traffic. They'll be here any minute." She turned back to me. "So, Mr. Cole, Thayer says you used to be a firefighter. Is that how, you're—" She made a circle in the air near her cheek, as if describing a stain to a dry cleaner. Thayer winced. "Dad, you don't have to talk about it." I lifted a palm. "It is all right, son." I took a sip of water that tasted like metal. "We had a lot of Halloweens at the station," I said. "Some nights were all pranks and missing pumpkins. Some nights were not." Callista smirked. "Guess you were very in theme," she said softly, and smiled as if she had done clever math. "Sometimes the past is a door that looks like the wall next to it. You only notice the outline when light slips through. I have lived long enough to know when to keep doors shut. When Thayer was 8 and wanted a drum set, I worked winter overtime pulling hose in sleet, and we made a drum from buckets instead. When his school sent home a note about free lunch, I got up at 3 for a second shift as a night janitor at the church basement. I fixed neighbors' sinks for nothing. I drove old Mr. Mancuso from a union hall to the VA hospital every Tuesday. When Alma got sick, I cooked soups and fed her with a spoon and told her the weather as if it were news she needed. I never asked anyone for help. People like to call a man like me stubborn. I call it staying lit. I looked at my son. He had Alma's hazel eyes and my square hands, and right then those hands were clenched tight on the table. He loved this woman. I could see in the way he watched her mouth even when she was unkind. Love can make you deaf. I wanted to tell him the thing every parent learns too late. The words you swallow for peace will sit in your chest and grow teeth. But I did not want to embarrass him in front of strangers who would become family. So I smiled, the good smile with the left side that still lifts, and asked Callista about her work. She said she did marketing for a wellness brand. She talked about content pillars and conversion funnels. I nodded as if she had described a new kind of fire. The door to the restaurant swung open behind me, and a gust of cold came with 2 shadows. The woman wore a navy coat and thin heels not made for November. The man's hair was snow white, trimmed short, a banker's haircut on a farmer's jaw. They stepped into the dining room, scanning for a table, and then their eyes landed on mine. The woman's hand flew to her mouth, as if something had leaped from the floor and bit her. Tears filled her eyes in a rush. The man's face drained of color, then flushed brick. He took 1 step, then 2, like a person walking into heavy water. The woman said, "Is it really you?" And her voice cracked on the last word, as if something inside had split. Conversations around us fell into silence, like someone had turned the city down. Callista shot up, startled. "Mom? Dad? What is wrong?" Thayer looked from me to them. His mouth open, a question half-formed and terrified. Time did a strange thing. It pulled like glass, cooling, slow and singing. Under the restaurant's low lights, I saw the woman's necklace. A small oval locket, gold, scratched. I had one like it in a drawer at home, but mine was blackened on the back where fire had licked it. I remembered a hallway filled with smoke, the wallpaper curling back like leaves. I remembered the taste of plastic and ash. Halloween night, 1993. A brown house with a white porch. A man beating at a door that did not want to let go. A woman screaming a name into air that did not carry sound the way it should. The ceiling groaned. A crib in a back bedroom. The smallest hand you ever saw wrapped around my thumb. When the roof buckled, I went down on my knees and crawled toward the little sound that was not a cry. Not yet, only a stubborn breath. After that fire, I never learned the family's names. Some rescues are clean. You hand a child to a mother and the world mends, and you all get your picture in the paper. Some rescues happen in the dark. I carried a baby out and went back in for someone else. By the time I stumbled onto the lawn the second time, eyes stinging, the faces had changed and blurred and moved. An ambulance door closed. A firefighter with a busted shoulder sat me down and poured water on my head. Later, when the night was all embers, I found a locket in my turnout coat pocket. Hot even then, I kept it without knowing why. Alma said it was a sign that every life you touch leaves a mark. When Alma died, I put the locket in the same drawer as her wedding ring, to keep them company. Now, in a room that smelled of butter and money, the woman with the navy coat took another step toward me. Her eyes were wells, and I could see the bottom. I felt shame right up my spine, because I had let a girl talk to me like trash and said nothing. I felt pride try to answer. I felt my sons feel like a hand on my shoulder. Callista's face had gone pale and tight. She whispered, "Mom, please, you are making it weird." The man with the white hair whispered to his wife, "Morel, easy." And I heard the name like a match flaring in a quiet room. Morel. In the report, after that Halloween, there had been a note, possible homeowner named Morel M. I had read it 100 times. I reached into my coat for my glasses, but my fingers found something else instead. Cold metal, oval, familiar as a heartbeat. Do not make a scene, I told myself, the way I used it before kicking in a door. But scenes have their own life. The waiter set down a cake at a nearby table and backed away with his hands lifted, as if he knew enough to give space. My son stood without knowing he had stood. "Dad?" he said, quietly, reaching for my arm. Callista's eyes were wild, and for the first time since I met her, she looked small. The man named Orson Morrow stopped a foot away, close enough to see the map of my scars. He had tears on his weathered face. He said, "My God," and his voice broke. His wife took my hand in both of hers like someone holding a bridge steady. She whispered a name only one person on this earth had ever called me, a name from a night with no moon, when a stranger pressed a baby into a stranger's arms. The room narrowed to the shape of a locket in my palm. The gold had darkened over the years, but when I thumbed the tiny hinge, it moved like it had been waiting. I could feel the old soot in the etching, the same way I can feel rain coming to my knee. Morel's breath hitched. She stared at my hand as if inside it was a living thing. I looked at Thayer, at the boy who used to fall asleep in my recliner with a baseball card on his chest. I looked at Callista, whose voice had cut me like wire only minutes ago. I looked at the two people whose eyes seemed to know me better than my own family did. There are moments when a life bends. You do not get to plan them. You only get to stand in them and decide who you are. I opened my palm. Inside lay the blackened twin of Morel's necklace. Her fingers fluttered to the locket at her throat, then hovered above mine as if frightened to touch. Orson made a sound like a prayer and a cough crossing paths. Callista whispered, "What is happening?" and no one answered her. The restaurant breathed as one creature, quiet and waiting. I felt the old heat again, but not the shame heat. The other kind. The kind that kept me alive under a collapsing roof. The kind that made me keep soup warm on a stove for a woman I loved long after she stopped being hungry. I looked at my son and said, "There, There's a story I should have told a long time ago. Morel's mouth shaped the word yes without sound. The lights flickered once, as if the building had remembered something, and then a siren wailed in the street outside, and I knew I had to choose my next breath carefully. The sound of that siren outside the restaurant didn't just echo through the street. It echoed through me. Every fire I ever ran into came back at once. The thick smoke, the screaming alarms, the heat so close it whispered in your ears. For a second, I wasn't in a restaurant anymore. I was back in 1993, standing in front of a burning house, praying to God I didn't believe in to give me just 30 more seconds. Thayer's voice yanked me back. "Dad," he said, his hand still on my arm. "What story?" His voice cracked the way it did when he was 15 and caught lying about the dent in the truck. I looked at him, then at the two strangers who somehow knew my name before I could say it. Morel's hand trembled as it reached for the locket in my palm, but she didn't touch it. She only looked, her tears falling onto the white tablecloth, spreading small, round stains that looked like candle burns. "I know you," she whispered. "I've seen your face before. In the smoke, in the paper. You were the one who—" Orson's hand rested on her shoulder. "Let him speak," he said, his voice gravelly, steady, but breaking at the edges. I didn't want to tell it here, not in front of people eating steaks and laughing about their week, but there's a moment when silence becomes heavier than truth. I took a deep breath, the kind I usually take before going into a house where I might not come out. "It was Halloween night," I said quietly. 32 years ago. I was off duty, driving home after a 12-hour shift. Saw the smoke from 3 blocks away. I didn't wait for dispatch. I just ran in. The restaurant seemed to shrink. Forks stopped moving. Even Callista wasn't scrolling anymore. There was a crib, I said, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. The mother was trapped upstairs, the father outside screaming for help. The ceiling was already falling. I could only carry one at a time. I went for the baby first. Morel's sob caught in her throat. She looked at Orson, who shut his eyes tight, as if he already knew how the story ended. "I got the baby out," I said. Then I went back in. But by the time I reached the stairs, part of the roof gave way. I was thrown against the wall. Fire all around. That's when I touched the left side of my face. That's when I earned these. Callista's mouth hung open. You saved someone's baby?" I nodded slowly. That baby had a locket. I found it later in my coat pocket. I kept it, thinking maybe one day I'd return it. But no one ever came forward. The hospital said both parents were missing for a while, recovering out of state. The baby was fine. I figured that was enough. Orson took a deep breath, his hand gripping the back of the chair until his knuckles turned white. "The baby," he whispered. "She lived. She's right here." He turned to Callista. She frowned, confused. "What are you talking about, Dad?" Morel pressed both hands over her mouth, shaking her head, then looked at me with a look only a mother could give, love, grief, and something too big to name. "He saved you, Callista," she said softly. This man carried you out of the fire when we couldn't." The air left the room. Callista blinked. "No," she said. "No, that's crazy." She looked at her parents, then at me. This can't be true. But the look on Morel's face said everything. Her tears weren't of doubt. They were of 30 years of guilt and gratitude breaking open all at once. Orson wiped his eyes, then extended his hand to me. "I should have found you years ago," he said. "We didn't even know your name. We thought you died in that fire." Thayer looked between us, his expression a tangle of shock and awe. "Wait," he said slowly. "You mean my fiancée's parents are the people Dad saved?" The waiter stepped closer, as if to check if we were all right, then stepped back again when he saw our faces. I looked at Callista. The proud smirk she had worn earlier was gone, replaced by something small, lost, childlike. She looked at me as though seeing me for the first time, not as a man to mock, but as a stranger who once gave her another chance at life. I said nothing. I just nodded and let the weight of it sit there. The silence fell holy. Then, suddenly, Callista stood up, her chair scraping across the floor. "I need air," she said, and before anyone could stop her, she hurried toward the exit. Thayer called after her, but she didn't turn back. Morel looked at me helplessly. She's overwhelmed, she said. She's always been proud. She doesn't like being vulnerable. I nodded. Neither did I once. Thayer looked torn, standing between me and the door. Dad, I'll go after her. Go, I said quietly. She's your future. He hesitated, then left. Morel and Orson sat down across from me. Their eyes were still wet, but there was something else there too. Relief, maybe. We prayed every year on Halloween, Orson said. We said if we ever met the man who saved her, we'd thank him properly. We didn't expect this. Neither did I said. I came here tonight, thinking I was meeting the woman who'd take care of my son. Turns out I met the one I already did. Morel reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was soft and cold. You gave me back my daughter, she said, her voice trembling. And we repaid you by letting her hurt you tonight. I shook my head. You didn't owe me anything. That night was my job. What happens now, that's life. Orson leaned back. Still, he said, there's more to this, isn't there? You kept that locket for 30 years. You didn't forget. I looked down at the locket again, then closed my hand around it. No, I said softly. Some fires go out. Others burn quietly inside you forever. Outside, through the restaurant window, I saw Callista standing under a streetlight, her phone forgotten in her hand. Thayer was beside her, trying to speak. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring at her reflection in the glass, tracing her own cheek like she'd never really seen it before. That was when I realized this story wasn't just about what I had done 30 years ago. It was about what I would do next. Because sometimes the hardest firefight isn't the one that burns your skin. It's the one that tries to burn your peace. And tonight, that fire had found me again. As I stood to leave, Orson's voice stopped me. Ephraim, he said, his face pale, there's something else you need to know. About that night, you didn't just save one life. The air around the table seemed to thicken as Orson's words hung between us. You didn't just save one life, he said again, his voice unsteady. I froze, the weight of that sentence pressing against my chest. Morel's hand slipped from mine. Her eyes darted to her husband's face, pleading warning, but he didn't stop. What do you mean? I asked quietly. Orson leaned forward, elbows on the table. There was someone else in that house, he said. Another child. I felt something twist inside me. That's not possible, I whispered. The report said there was only one. Morel closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. The report was wrong, she said softly. There were two. The restaurant seemed to fade around us. The clinking glasses, the murmurs, the background piano. All of it disappeared, leaving only the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. You had twins? I asked. Morel nodded, her voice barely audible. Yes, 2 girls, Callista and her sister, Callan. I swallowed hard. What happened to her? Orson's hand shook as he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. He slid it across the table. It was worn at the edges, creased from years of being handled. 2 infants, wrapped in matching blue blankets, their tiny fists curled, identical except for a faint birthmark near the ear of the one on the right. Callan, Morel said, her voice cracking. We thought she died that night. The firefighters told us only one child made it out alive. They never found the other. I stared at the photo until my eyes blurred. But you said I saved more than one life. Orson nodded. We found out years later that someone pulled a second child from the wreckage. A neighbor said a man carried her toward an ambulance, but there was confusion. No one took his name, and when we woke up in a hospital days later, there was only Callista. He paused. The other baby was listed as unidentified. The world tilted. You're saying I took her? Morel shook her head quickly. No, not took, saved, but something went wrong. Records got lost, departments shifted. They said the baby was transferred to a children's home until the family could be located. But by the time we searched, she was gone, adopted, renamed. I pressed a hand to my forehead, trying to breathe. Do you know where she went? Orson looked at me steadily. That's the thing, Ephraim, we think you might. The words hit me like cold water. I don't. I started, but then I stopped. Something old, something buried deep began to move in the dark corners of my mind. A memory I hadn't visited in decades. It came back like smoke, hazy, choking real. The night after the fire, the hospital smelled of bleach and exhaustion. I was sitting on a bench outside the ER, wrapped in a blanket, my face bandaged, when a nurse came out holding a bundle. She won't stop crying unless someone holds her, she said. Her parents haven't been found yet. I remembered how small she was, how her tiny hand had gripped my thumb, just like Thayer's used to when he was little. I remembered her breathing, fast and frightened, and how I whispered, "You're safe now, little one." Then the nurse took her back inside, and that was the last I saw her. Until now, I looked up at Orson and Morel. I never knew what happened to that baby. I thought she was returned to you. She wasn't, Morel said. She grew up somewhere else. We don't know where. We hired investigators for years, but all we had was this. She reached into her purse and handed me another paper, a faded clipping from a local paper 20 years ago. It showed a teenage girl volunteering at a firehouse charity event. Her name was Callan Grace Cole. I stared at the name. My heart stopped. Cole, my name. No, that couldn't be right. She took your last name, Orson said, his voice trembling. Doesn't that mean something? I tried to speak, but my throat had gone dry. Callan Grace. It couldn't be coincidence. When Alma and I were still young, before Thayer was born, we used to foster children through the church. One of them, a quiet little girl with curly brown hair and a tiny scar near her ear, came to us after a fire. The records had been lost. They said her parents couldn't be identified. We took her in for a year, maybe 2, until the state found relatives who wanted her. She was maybe 5 when she left. And her name had been Callan. My hands shook so badly I had to put the photo down. Dear God, I whispered. She lived with us. Morel's hand flew to her mouth. You knew her? I nodded, still reeling. We thought she was just another child in the system. They told us she had no family. Orson leaned forward. Where is she now? I shook my head. I don't know. She was taken to another foster home, then adopted. We lost touch. Morel's voice broke. Then she could still be out there. Yes, I said quietly. But she wouldn't be a child anymore. She'd be 32. Orson rubbed his face. We've looked everywhere. But the name, Callan Cole, that's what led us to you. We thought maybe she stayed in touch. I looked at the table. The 2 lockets gleaming faintly under the restaurant lights. One gold, one blackened. 2 halves of a story that never finished. She didn't, I said softly, but maybe it's time I find her. Morel's eyes filled again. Would you help us? I nodded slowly. If I saved her once, I can do it again, even if it's just to bring her home. Outside, through the window, Thayer and Callista stood under the streetlight. She was crying now, her phone forgotten, her face pale. He held her hand, whispering something I couldn't hear. For a moment, I saw not the woman who mocked me, but the child I had once carried through fire and the sister she never knew existed. That night, something inside me shifted. The story I thought was finished had just opened its next chapter. As we left the restaurant, Morel touched my arm and said, Ephraim, there's one more thing you should know about Callan. The people who adopted her, they changed her name again. You might know her already. The street outside the restaurant was colder than before, the kind of chill that crept into your bones and made your memories ache. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, every car passing by leaving streaks of color across the glass. Thayer and Callista stood a few yards away, their shadows tangled under the streetlight. She was crying softly now, and he held her close, whispering into her hair. For the first time that night, I saw him as a man, not a boy trying to impress, but a man trying to comfort. Behind me, Morel's voice trembled. Ephraim, she said, the family who adopted Callan, they lived not too far from here, in Parma. I turned to her slowly. Parma? She nodded. Yes, the mother worked in a nursing home, And the father was a firefighter, too. His name was Franklin. She stopped, glancing at Orson. Franklin Cole. The world tilted again, and for a moment, I thought I had misheard her. I stared at her, the blood draining from my face. Franklin Cole, I repeated. That was my brother. Morrell nodded weakly. Then you do know her. My knees felt unsteady, and I gripped the railing beside me. The noise of the street faded into a hum. My brother and I hadn't spoken in over 20 years. Not since Alma's funeral. We'd fought over something small that had turned into something huge, like it always does when pride is involved. He'd moved away, remarried, and I'd heard little since. The thought that he had raised that little girl, that he had raised Callan, sent a rush of emotions through me I couldn't name. Franklin adopted her? I asked, my voice low. Morrell nodded. That's what our investigator found. The paperwork said she was adopted by a firefighter and his wife in Ohio. They changed her name to Grace Cole. Grace. The name hit me like a soft punch to the chest. I knew that name, because Grace wasn't just anyone. She was the nurse at my old rehabilitation center, the woman who helped me after my second surgery, when I couldn't even hold a fork without shaking, the woman who brought me homemade soup on Christmas Eve when no one else came. She had a kindness that made people talk soft around her, a strength that reminded me of Alma, Grace Cole. She once told me she didn't know her real parents, that she'd been adopted young. But something about the name Cole had always felt like fate. I swallowed hard. I know her, I said, my voice almost whisper. Orson blinked. You do? Yes, I said, still stunned. She's a nurse. Works at the Brookside Rehabilitation Center. I spent months there after my back surgery 2 years ago. She took care of me. Morrell's hands flew to her mouth again, and she began to cry. You mean all this time she's been right here? I nodded. Here in Cleveland, less than 10 miles from me. Thayer walked back toward us just then, his arm around Callista. Her eyes were red, her face pale. When she saw her mother crying, she looked confused. What's going on now? Morrell turned to her daughter. Sweetheart, she said softly, you have a sister, a twin. Callista stared at her, frozen. What? Orson stepped forward, his voice firm but tender. You were one of 2 babies, Callista. The other, Callan. She survived too. We just found out who raised her. Callista blinked, her mouth opening but no sound coming out. She looked at me, then back at her parents. And you think he knows her? She said, pointing toward me, her voice breaking. Morrell nodded, still crying. He doesn't just know her, darling. He saved both of you. The air between us seemed to hum. Callista's eyes filled with tears, her hands shaking. I made fun of him, she whispered. Oh my God! I laughed at the man who... She covered her mouth, choking back a sob. Thayer tried to pull her close, but she stepped back, looking at me. Mr. Cole, Ephraim, how could you have known? I didn't, I said gently. Not until tonight. Sometimes life keeps its secrets until we're ready to face them. Morrell took a deep breath. We need to find her. Grace deserves to know. Yes, I said, but this time I'll make sure no one loses her again. We stood there in the cold, for souls linked by something none of us fully understood. I looked at my son, at Callista, and thought of how strange and fragile the threads of life could be. One cruel comment at dinner had led to this. A door to a past none of us realized was still open. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Brookside Rehabilitation. I said quietly. She's on the night shift every Thursday. That's tomorrow. Callista wiped her face. You're going to see her? Yes, I said. And this time, I won't walk away with questions. Thayer put his arm around me. I'm coming too, he said. Morrell smiled weakly. So are we. I nodded, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Real, burning purpose. Because tomorrow, for the first time since that fire, I would face the one person I had unknowingly saved twice. And I would finally tell her the truth. As I started to leave, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. A soft, familiar voice spoke on the other end. Mr. Cole, it's Grace from Brookside. I found something today, a locket. It looks just like the one you showed me years ago. Her voice on the line froze me mid-step. Soft, calm, but carrying something heavy beneath it. The kind of tone a person uses when they know their life is about to change. Grace, I said slowly, gripping the phone tighter. You found a locket? Yes, she replied. One of the patients passed away last week. I was helping the staff pack up his belongings today, and it was just there, burned a little around the edges. Inside was a photo, 2 babies wrapped in blue blankets. My chest tightened. What did the back of the locket look like? Blackened, she said, like it had been through a fire. I thought of you because you once told me your wife's locket looked the same, but this one had a name scratched into it. I felt the ground shift beneath me. What name? There was a long pause. Then she whispered, Callan. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The city noise faded. The traffic, the wind, the voices behind me. All gone. Just that name, echoing in my head. Grace, I said quietly, listen to me. That locket belonged to your birth family. Silence. Then a shaky laugh. The kind people make when they think you're joking, but hope you're not. Mr. Cole, what are you saying? I took a deep breath. I'm saying, I know who you are, and I know your real name. There was another pause. My real name? Callan Morrow, I said. The line went silent except for her breathing. Behind me, Thayer and Callista were watching. I turned, my voice barely steady. She's found it. The second locket. The twin. Morrell gasped and grabbed Orson's hand. She has it. I nodded. She does. She doesn't know what it means yet, but she will. On the other end of the call, Grace's voice trembled. How could you know something like that? Because I was there, I said. I was the one who pulled you from the fire 32 years ago. A soft sound escaped her, half gasp, half sob. No, she whispered. That can't be true. My parents told me I was abandoned. They were lied to, I said gently. Your birth parents never stopped looking for you. They're alive, Grace. They're here. The silence stretched so long that I thought she had hung up, then faintly alive? Yes, I said, alive and waiting to meet you. A sharp breath on the line, then the faint sound of something dropping. A clipboard. Maybe. Her voice broke. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything yet. I told her. Just meet us tomorrow. Brookside, 7 p.m. You'll understand everything then. There was another small pause before she whispered, Okay. When I hung up, I realized my hands were trembling. I hadn't felt that kind of trembling since the first time I held Thayer as a baby. Callista stepped closer. She agreed. I nodded. Tomorrow night. She looked scared and hopeful at the same time. I can't believe I have a twin. Orson put an arm around her shoulder. You always said you felt like something was missing, he said softly. Morrell wiped her eyes. Maybe tomorrow we'll all feel whole again. Thayer looked at me. You okay, Dad? I nodded, but my voice came out rough. Yeah, just thinking. He gave a small smile. You're thinking about Mom. I met his eyes and didn't deny it. She always said everything circles back. Looks like she was right. We stood there for a while under the streetlight, letting the night air cool the storm inside us. Then I turned to Callista. You said something cruel to me earlier. I began, not unkindly, but tonight showed you what words can do. They burn or they heal. Tomorrow, you get to choose which kind you speak. She nodded, tears welling again. I'll make it right. Good, I said softly, because your sister's been walking through a different kind of fire all her life. Morrell and Orson left together, still holding hands like they didn't want to let go of this fragile thread that had brought their daughters back. Thayer drove me home. Neither of us talked much. The silence between us was full but peaceful. When we pulled into my driveway, I looked at him. You know, I said, life doesn't always give second chances, but when it does, don't waste them. He smiled. I won't. You taught me that. After he drove off, I sat in the quiet house for a long time. The clock ticked. The fridge hummed. On the table lay the blackened locket, the one I'd carried for decades. I placed it beside Alma's photo and whispered, We're almost done, love. Almost. Then I turned off the light. The next evening came too slowly. I wore my best jacket, the one Alma bought me on our anniversary, and drove to Brookside as the sun went down. The sky was the color of old brass. When I walked in, Grace was waiting by the nurse's station. She looked smaller than I remembered, her kind eyes red from crying, the locket clutched in her hand. I didn't sleep all night, she said. Everything you told me, I kept thinking it had to be some kind of mistake. It's no mistake, I said softly, and you're about to see proof. Just then, the door opened. Callista stepped in with her parents, and there, behind her, Grace turned at the sound of the door, and when her eyes met Callista's, the room froze. The two women stared at each other, identical faces divided by 32 years of loss. Callista whispered, "Oh my God!" Grace took one step forward, her hand trembling. "You look like me." Then she looked at Morel and Orson, and something inside her seemed to collapse. "I've seen those faces before," she said faintly. "In dreams." Morel burst into tears. "It's you," she whispered. "It's really you." Grace looked at me, her eyes full of wonder and fear. "You were right," she said softly. "Everything you said was true." And for the first time in decades, I felt something lift inside me. Not pride, not victory. Something quieter, something like peace. But peace, I've learned, never comes without one final test. Because as we stood there, Callista's phone buzzed. She looked down, her face draining of color. "What is it?" Thayer asked. She turned the screen toward us. It was a message from an unknown number. The message read, "You think that fire was an accident? Ask your Savior what really happened that night." All eyes turned to me. Grace stepped back, fear flickering in her face. Morel whispered, "Ephraim, what does that mean?" The room went dead silent. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought stopped cold. Callista's phone screen glowed between her shaking fingers, the message burning brighter than the fluorescent lights above us. "You think that fire was an accident? Ask your Savior what really happened that night." I stared at it for a long time, my stomach twisting. The words were cruelly chosen, sharp enough to slice through 30 years of healing that hadn't even begun. Grace looked at me, her face pale, eyes wide and searching. "Mr. Cole, what does that mean?" I couldn't answer. My throat closed around the truth I'd buried so deep I convinced myself it was gone. Morel clutched her husband's arm. Orson's jaw tightened, his old instincts flaring, the kind of protective rage only a father could know. "Someone's playing games." I managed finally, forcing my voice steady. "Don't listen to it." But even as I said it, I felt the tremor of my own words. Thayer stepped forward, eyes darting between us. "Dad," he said slowly, "is there something you haven't told us?" The weight of their stares pressed against me. I could feel every scar on my face burn with old heat. My hands, calloused and scarred, felt suddenly dirty. "I think we all need to sit down," I said quietly. The nurse's station had a small visitor's room beside it. Grace led us there. The fluorescent lights flickered. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. Callista sat with her arms crossed, shaking her head as if trying to make sense of everything. Grace sat opposite her, still clutching the locket in both hands. They looked like reflections of each other in a cracked mirror. Two lives that had burned apart before they even began. Morel was trembling. Orson had his arm around her, but even he looked like he was holding himself together by will alone. Thayer stayed close to me, watching, waiting. I took a slow breath. That night, Halloween 1993, it wasn't supposed to go that way. I began. My voice came out lower than I intended, roughened by years of smoke and guilt. You've heard my version already. I was off duty, saw smoke, went in. But what I never told anyone was I knew that house. Morel's eyes widened. "You knew it?" I nodded. "Not you, not your names. But the address. 422 Maple Street. It used to belong to a man named Henry Laird. He was a landlord I'd worked for when I was young, back when Alma and I were saving for our first home. That house had been his name for decades. He rented it to families, one after another. It was old, the wiring bad, the furnace leaking smoke. I'd told him a dozen times it needed repairs. He never listened. Orson frowned. Are you saying it was negligence? I looked down. Worse. It was a cover-up. Their faces blurred as I stared into a memory I had tried for years to forget. The week before the fire, I said, I was doing maintenance inspections for the fire department. Routine safety checks. I went to that address and found the furnace leaking gas. I reported it, told the department to flag the property for violations. But that same night, the chief, my own chief, told me to let it go, said it was being handled privately. Grace whispered, Privately? Henry Laird was his cousin, I said bitterly. They didn't want on record. Said they'd fix it quietly to avoid fines. I argued. He told me to drop it. I didn't. I wrote it up anyway. The report disappeared from the system 2 days later. The next night, the house caught fire. Morrell gasped. You're saying it wasn't an accident? I nodded slowly. No, it was negligence, criminal negligence. And the department covered it up. They blamed a candle left near a curtain. They closed the case within a week. Callista's hands shook as she gripped her knees. Why didn't you tell anyone? I met her eyes. Because I did, and no one believed me. They said I was bitter, that I was trying to shift blame, because one of my men died going back inside that house. They called it an accident, wrote me off as unstable. I lost my promotion, my reputation, almost my career. Grace's voice broke. You lost all that for us? I shook my head. For the truth. But the truth came too late. The department buried it. Henry Laird disappeared, and I carried the guilt. Thayer rubbed the back of his neck, pacing. So who sent that message? I don't know, I said, though deep down part of me suspected. But whoever it is, they know the story, and they want it reopened. Morrell looked at me through tears. Why now, after all these years? I sighed. Because fires don't stay buried forever. Someone must have found old records. Or maybe Henry's family. Maybe someone wants revenge. Callista suddenly stood, eyes wild. You're saying someone could have caused that fire? That our whole lives were built on someone's mistake? I met her gaze. I'm saying your lives were built on survival. What someone else tried to destroy, you both lived through. That's what matters now. She shook her head, tears falling. No, what matters is the truth. Before I could answer, Grace's phone buzzed. She looked down and went pale. It's the same number. Orson leaned over. What does it say? She read it aloud, her voice trembling. He wasn't the only one who knew. Check the fire report's witness list. You'll see the name. My heart stopped. Witness list. Grace nodded. It says, Thayer Cole. Everyone turned toward my son. Thayer's mouth dropped open. What? I wasn't even alive then. I frowned, trying to think. That's impossible. You were born in 1995, 2 years after. Grace scrolled further, then gasped. Wait, it says witness. Thayer Franklin Cole, age 4. The room froze. That's not me, Thayer said quickly. It can't be. But I knew that name. And suddenly, like a match in the dark, it all came back. My brother, I whispered. Franklin's son. Your cousin. He died young. Thayer frowned. I didn't know I had a cousin. You wouldn't, I said. Franklin and I stopped speaking after that fire. He blamed me for not saving one of the firefighters, his friend. He moved away, started over. His little boy, that was Thayer Franklin Cole. He must have seen something that night. Grace's voice dropped to a whisper. Something like, what? I closed my eyes. Maybe you started it. A knock at the door startled everyone. A man in a brown coat stepped in. He was tall, weathered, with gray stubble and tired eyes. Sorry to interrupt, he said, his voice gravelly. I heard there was a Cole reunion going on here. Morrell tensed. Who are you? He smiled faintly. Name's Henry Laird. The air went ice cold. I stood. My chair scraped the floor, loud and sharp. You got nerve showing your face here. Henry shrugged. 30 years of guilt will make a man brave. I heard the whispers. Thought I should finally tell my side. Orson clenched his fists. Your negligence almost killed my family. Henry looked at him, then at Grace and Callista. Almost, but not quite. And that's what matters now, isn't it? Everyone lived. Everyone except the one person no one ever talks about. I narrowed my eyes. Who? Henry leaned against the doorframe. The man who set the fire. You think I did it, but you're wrong. I wasn't even there that night. Someone else lit that match. Who? I demanded. He looked at me long and hard. Your brother, Franklin. The room exploded in voices. Morel gasped. Thayer shouted. That's a lie. Callista stood frozen, shaking her head. Henry lifted his hands. Believe what you want, but I've got proof. Insurance records. Franklin owed me money. He thought setting that house on fire would clear the debt and cover his tracks. Didn't know there were tenants inside. I found out too late. My knees weakened. My brother. My own blood. Morel was crying openly now. You expect us to believe this? Henry pulled a folded document from his coat pocket. Read it. Fire claim filed under Franklin J. Cole dated October 30th, 1993. 1 day before your house burned. He placed the paper on the table. My hands shook as I opened it. There it was, his signature. My brother's. I confronted him years later, Henry said quietly. He told me he never meant for anyone to die, but when the fire spread, he panicked. He ran. You showed up before he could put it out. Grace's voice cracked. And all this time, he said, nothing? Henry nodded, shame flickering in his eyes. Because I thought the truth would destroy you all, and maybe it still will. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second heavier than the last. I dropped the paper. Franklin's gone, I said hollowly. Died 5 years ago in his sleep. Thayer's voice was barely audible. My uncle did this. I nodded. Looks like it. Morel whispered. Then that means you saved the children your brother almost killed. I looked at her, eyes burning. Yes, I did, and I'll carry that until my last breath. Henry shifted uneasily. There's more, he said. Someone else knows. That message, whoever's sending it wants to finish what Franklin started. They've been following me for weeks. I stepped closer. Who? He hesitated, glancing toward the door. I don't know, but if you want to protect them, he pointed at Grace and Callista, you'd better find out soon. Because fire, Mr. Cole, he paused, his eyes narrowing, has a way of coming back. The lights flickered again. A cold wind rattled the window, and somewhere outside, in the parking lot, the faint smell of smoke drifted in through the vent. The fire alarms began to wail. Grace screamed. Callista grabbed her sister's hand. And as red lights flashed across the walls, I realized with horror the building was on fire. Again, the alarm blared so loud it felt like the world was ending again. The shriek of the siren, the blinking red light, the unmistakable smell of smoke. It was all too familiar. The years between then and now collapsed into one unbearable moment. Grace's eyes were wide with terror. Callista clutched her sister's arm, pulling her toward the exit. We need to get out now, she shouted. Thayer ran to the door and yanked the handle. The hallway was already clouded with smoke. A voice over the loudspeaker stuttered through static. Fire emergency. Please proceed to the nearest exit. But I knew that tone, that chaos, that smell. This was an accident. The smoke was too heavy too fast. The flames too close to the main entrance. Someone had started this fire intentionally, and they'd done it to trap us. I grabbed Grace by the shoulders. You know the building best. Emergency exits. She pointed through the haze. The stairwell near the back nurse's station, but it's locked after visiting hours. Only staff have the key. I've got it, she said quickly, fumbling for her lanyard. Orson guided Morel toward the door, coughing hard. Come on, everyone, move. But Henry Laird was frozen, staring into the smoke like he'd seen a ghost. Henry! I barked. You move, or I'll drag you myself. He blinked, coming back to life. and followed us into the hall. The air was thick and sour, the kind that burns your lungs before you even see the flames. I could hear the distant crackling, a sound that once meant adrenaline to me, now pure dread. We moved in a tight line, me at the front, Thayer bringing up the rear. The emergency lights blinked dimly through the haze, glowing red against the gray. Grace coughed. Something's wrong. The fire's spreading from the east wing. There shouldn't be anything flammable there. My stomach dropped. Then someone planted it. We turned the corner, and that's when I saw it, a rolling wave of fire blooming from an open door halfway down the corridor. The floor tiles cracked beneath the heat. It looked alive, like it had a will of its own. Callista screamed. I stepped in front of her instinctively, throwing my jacket around her shoulders. Keep low. I shouted. Crawl if you have to. Smoke clawed at our eyes as we moved. Grace unlocked the stairwell door, but when she pushed, it jammed. Come on, she cried, shoving her shoulder against it. I joined her. One hard push, then another. The metal warped and groaned, finally giving way with a shriek. Go! I yelled. Everyone down. They stumbled through one by one, Grace, Callista, Morel, Orson, Thayer. But when I turned for Henry, he wasn't behind me anymore. He was standing halfway down the hall, silhouetted by the fire, coughing violently. Henry! I shouted. Get over here. He shook his head weakly. There's someone else. I saw a figure by the window. What? But I didn't have time to argue. I ran back through the smoke, my lungs already screaming. At the far end of the corridor, through the orange blur flame, I saw it too, a shadow moving near the window, a figure in a hooded coat, slipping out onto the fire escape. The same figure turned once, saw me, and disappeared into the night. I chased forward a few steps before the ceiling groaned. A beam split and came crashing down, showering sparks. Henry lunged to push me aside, and the fire swallowed him whole. I grabbed his arm, but the flames roared up faster than I could react. The heat seared my skin through my sleeves. He looked at me once, eyes full of regret. Tell them, I'm sorry, he rasped, and then the smoke took him. Henry! I shouted, but there was no answer. I stumbled backward, choking, my vision swimming. The fire was closing in, the smoke too thick to see. My head pounded as oxygen fled my lungs. Then a hand grabbed mine, Grace's. Dad! She screamed. Come on. I didn't even process the word at first. Dad. It slipped out of her mouth like something she'd always known. She dragged me toward the stairwell, and Thayer helped pull us through. The door slammed shut behind us, cutting off the roar of the flames. We stumbled down the stairs two at a time. The heat chased us, the air thick with chemical smoke. When we reached the lobby, fire crews were already storming in, hoses, axes, shouts. The cold air outside hit me like a slap. Sirens wailed, red lights flashing across the dark parking lot. Paramedics rushed forward, guiding us to a safe zone. Morel collapsed against Orson, sobbing. Callista held Grace's hand tightly, their faces streaked with soot and tears. For the first time, the sisters looked inseparable, two halves of one miracle that refused to die. A firefighter ran over to me. Sir, were you inside? I nodded weakly. Henry Laird, he's still in there. The man spoke into his radio, shouting for a search team. Grace sat beside me, trembling. You saw someone, didn't you? Yes, I said, staring at the flames eating through the second floor. Whoever set this fire, they were there, watching. Thayer crouched beside me. You think they're the one who sent the messages? I nodded. And if they went this far, they won't stop. Morel looked up, her face pale. Why would anyone want to hurt us? Because of what the truth exposed, I said grimly. Someone wants to erase it all. Every witness, every survivor. The firefighters poured water into the building. The hiss loud and angry. Sparks flew into the air like fireflies. Then one of them shouted, We found him. Two men emerged through the smoke, dragging a limp figure on a stretcher. My stomach turned. It was Henry. His clothes were burned through, his face almost unrecognizable, but his chest rose and fell faintly. A medic knelt beside him, checking his pulse. Barely alive, he muttered. They rushed him to the ambulance. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of Henry's hand twitching. He was trying to reach for me. Then the siren wailed, and they sped off into the night. I sat there in the cold parking lot, the adrenaline fading, leaving only exhaustion. Grace leaned her head against my shoulder. "You saved us again," she whispered. I looked at her, at the face that mirrored Callista's. "No," I said softly. "You saved me." The wind shifted, carrying away the last of the smoke. The building was ruined, but we were alive. For now, because somewhere out there, someone was still watching. Someone who knew too much about that night 32 years ago. And if they'd set one fire to silence us, they'd try again. I looked at Thayer. "We need to find out who sent those messages. Check phone records, trace calls, anything." He nodded, jaw set. "I'll start tonight." Callista stepped closer. "Whoever did this, why target you?" I looked at the sisters, then at their parents. Because I was supposed to die in that first fire. And someone doesn't like that I didn't. The truth sat like smoke in the back of my throat. Maybe Henry was lying about Franklin. Maybe he wasn't. But one thing was certain. Someone else had been there that night. Someone who still had unfinished business. As the fire trucks packed up and the last embers died, a police officer approached us. "Mr. Cole," he asked. We found something near the east exit. He handed me a small object sealed in a clear bag, a silver lighter. Old, scratched, engraved with 2 initials. FC, Franklin Cole, my brother's lighter. I stared at it, my heart pounding. "That's impossible," I whispered. "He's been dead 5 years. The officer frowned. "Maybe not as dead as you think." The world tilted again, that same cold wind crawling under my collar. I looked at Grace and Callista, both staring at the lighter in horror. I thought I'd finally buried my ghosts, but the fire had brought them back. As the police lights flashed and the paramedic sirens faded into the night, my phone buzzed again. One new message. Same unknown number. "You didn't save them, Ephraim. You only delayed what was meant to happen." The message burned brighter than the flames ever did. "You didn't save them, Ephraim. You only delayed what was meant to happen." I read it 3 times before I could even feel my hands again. Grace stood beside me, still covered in soot, staring at the screen as if she could will it away. Callista reached in my arm, but I barely noticed. Every word in that message carried a chill I knew too well. The tone of someone who enjoys watching things burn. Thayer leaned over my shoulder. "Dad, it's the same number?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "The same one." The police officer was still nearby, talking to the firefighters. I waved him over and showed him the text. He nodded grimly. "We'll have our cyber team trace it. But I'll be honest, whoever this is, they're covering their tracks." "They've covered them before," I muttered. 32 years ago. Grace looked up sharply. "You think it's connected to the original fire?" "I don't think," I said. "I know." Back home that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Henry's last words in the smoke. He wasn't the only one who knew. He'd said Franklin set that fire. But if Franklin was dead and his lighter had just been found in a fresh one, then someone else was finishing what he started. At 3 a.m., I sat in the dark at my kitchen table, staring at that lighter through the clear police bag. My brother's initials glared back at me. Franklin Cole, the man I'd grown up with, fought beside, laughed with, and buried 5 years ago. Except now, I wasn't sure what I'd buried. A knock came at the door. For a second, I thought it was my mind playing tricks. Then it came again, firmer. I opened the door slowly. Standing there, in the moonlight, was Grace. Her hair was damp from a shower, her face pale but steady. "I couldn't sleep either," she said softly. "I needed to talk." I nodded, stepping aside. "Come in." She walked to the table, her eyes falling on the lighter. "That's his." "Yes," I said, "but it shouldn't be." She sat down across from me, folding her hands. "I keep thinking about what Henry said before he—" Her voice faltered. "Before he was taken away. He said your brother didn't mean for anyone to die, that he panicked." I nodded. "That's what he said." What if he was telling the truth? I frowned. Meaning, what if Franklin wasn't trying to kill anyone? What if someone else used him? Someone who wanted that fire to happen. Her words hung in the air. They made sense in the worst possible way. The department had covered up the original report. Henry had disappeared. Franklin had conveniently taken the blame and the insurance payout. But who benefited when the smoke cleared? I got up and went to the cabinet, pulling out a thick folder, my old station records. I hadn't looked at them in years. Inside were yellow papers, inspection reports, and incident summaries. I flipped through them until one name stopped me cold. Chief Walter Grant. He was my commanding officer at the time. The same man who'd ordered me to bury the safety violation report on 422 Maple Street. A month after the fire, he'd retired, with a sudden promotion and a hefty pension increase. And the signature on the payout authorization form, his Grant. I said under my breath, it was him. He ordered the report deleted. Franklin must have gone along with the plan. Maybe for money, maybe out of fear. But when it went wrong, Grant blamed him and vanished. Grace's eyes widened. Then the message is from someone tied to him. I finished. Maybe his family. Someone who knows everything and wants to punish the people left standing. She took a deep breath. Then, that means they'll come after you next. I gave a dry laugh. They already have. Just then, my phone buzzed again. Another message. You finally remember. Come to where it started, or more will burn. Attached was a photo, an old street sign. Maple Street. Grace grabbed my arm. You can't go alone. I won't, I said, but I have to go. The next morning, I called Thayer. He didn't argue. He just said, tell me when to be there. By noon. We were driving through the outskirts of Cleveland, down roads I hadn't seen in decades. Most of Maple Street was gone now, torn down and replaced by warehouses. But the empty lot where the old house once stood was still there. The soil was black in places, even after all these years. The sky was heavy with clouds. Grace, Callista, and the Morrows followed in another car, refusing to be left behind. When we arrived, the wind was sharp, carrying the faint smell of rain and earth. The foundation of the old house was still visible, just broken bricks and warped concrete, half buried by weeds. I stepped onto the ground slowly, feeling the past crawl back up through my shoes. This is where it happened, I said quietly. Right here. Grace walked beside me, her voice soft. I feel like I've been here before. You have, I said. You just don't remember. Then from the edge of the lot, a voice echoed. Funny, isn't it, how the past always finds you? We turned. A man stood by the rusted gate, wearing a long coat, his hair gray, face weathered. He looked older, but I'd have known those eyes anywhere. Walter Grant, I said. He smiled faintly. You still recognize your old chief. Orson stepped forward, anger flashing. You're the one who caused all this? Grant shrugged. I caused nothing. Your husband did, he said, nodding at Morrell. He played with matches, and the wind took care of the rest. I clenched my fists. You lied. You made him take the fall. Grant's smile faded. He was supposed to burn with the house. You were supposed to die, too. But fate has a sixth sense of humor. He took a step closer, and I saw the outline of a gun under his coat. Don't. I warned. You think 30 years of silence was easy? He snarled. I built my life on that lie. Then someone dug it up again. Henry, your brother, you, all of you poking around where you shouldn't. Thayer moved slightly to the side, his hand slipping behind him where I knew he carried his old service pistol, an off-duty habit from a security job. Put the gun down, Walter, I said calmly. It's over. No, he said. It ends the way it should have back then, with fire. He pulled a lighter from his pocket, my brother's lighter, and flicked it. A small flame danced in the wind. Walter, I said slowly, you light that, and you'll prove everything you ever tried to hide. He laughed. I already did. Then he dropped it. The dry weeds caught instantly, fire crawling across the ground like it remembered a path from before. Grace screamed. Callista grabbed a branch and started beating the flames. Orson pulled Morrell back. Thayer lunged forward and tackled Grant to ground, the gun skidding away. I grabbed my jacket and smothered the fire near Grace's feet. Grant struggled, but Thayer pinned him. "You're done," he shouted. "Not yet," Grant hissed, and pulled another lighter from his sleeve. Before he could spark it, I kicked it from his hand. He lunged, knocking me back, but years of fighting fire had taught me balance. I swung once hard, and he hit the ground, dazed. The flame had spread to the edge of the lot now, but sirens were already wailing in the distance. The fire department, the new generation, was coming. Grant tried to crawl away, coughing. "You think you won, Cole," he rasped. "You think truth matters? The world forgets everything." "Maybe," I said, standing over him. "But not me, not them." I nodded toward Grace and Callista. "Your lies stole their childhoods. Mine end them." Police cars skidded to a stop. Officers rushed in, guns drawn. Within seconds, Grant was in handcuffs, the fire nearly out. The rain began to fall, soft, slow, steady. Grace stood beside me, her hand finding mine. Callista joined her. The three of us watched as the last smoke drifted into the sky, the earth finally cooling. Later that evening, back at my house, we sat around a table. All of us, Morel, Orson, Callista, Grace, and Thayer. The air was quiet but warm. Grace took off her locket, the burned one, and set it beside mine. The two halves fit perfectly. Inside, the tiny photos of the twins face each other again. "After all these years," she said softly, "it's finally over." "Not over," I corrected her gently. "But right." Morel smiled through tears. "You brought our family back." I shook my head. "You did that yourselves. I just carried the fire until you were ready to see the light." Callista leaned forward. "So what happens now?" I looked at her and smiled faintly. "Now we live, we forgive, and we make sure no one ever hides the truth in smoke again." The rain outside turned into a steady rhythm against the windows, a sound that, for the first time in decades, didn't make me flinch. Thayer lifted his glass. "To new beginnings," he said. "We all raised ours." As I looked at Grace and Callista, side by side, I thought of Alma, her voice soft as she stirred soup on a cold night. "Everything circles back, Ephraim, even the broken things." She'd been right. Some fires destroy, others reveal. And when the smoke finally clears, what's left isn't ruin, it's truth. If you were Ephraim, would you have hidden the truth to protect your family or faced the fire to set them free? Tell us below, and remember, every spark leaves a story. My love, did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.